They mocked me like I was nothing, just the daughter who never made it. The laughter echoed through my parents' anniversary party, each joke cutting deeper than the last. But when the man beside me set down his glass and said in a voice that commanded armies, "Stand up, show some respect," the entire room froze. My family had no idea who they'd just humiliated, or that the decorated colonel sitting at their table owed me his life. Tonight, 3 years of silence would finally end. My name is Claire Donovan, and at 32, I'd learned that family gatherings were just elaborate stages for disappointment. The banner stretched across my parents' living room read, "40 years of love" in gaudy gold letters, but all I could feel was the familiar weight of being the family failure. I stood in the doorway, watching relatives mill about with their drinks and fake smiles. The house smelled of my mother's pot roast and my father's cigars, scents that should have meant home, but instead reminded me why I'd stayed away for 2 years. "Claire, you actually came—" My brother Jake's voice boomed across the room. He strode over in his dress blues, every metal polished to perfection. Air Force Captain Jake Donovan, the golden child who could do no wrong. Mom was taking bets on whether you'd show. I forced a smile. Wouldn't miss it for the world. "Still playing with your toys." He meant my engineering work, but the condescension dripped like honey. Building those little drones. Little drones. If only he knew that my toys had capabilities that would make his F-16 look like a paper airplane. But I couldn't tell him that. The NDA I'd signed 3 years ago made sure of it. "Something like that," I murmured, accepting a glass of wine from a passing waiter. My mother appeared, her perfectly styled hair not moving despite her dramatic gestures. "Claire, sweetheart, you look tired. Are you eating enough?" "You know, Jake's friend from the base is single, very handsome, stable job. Mom, I'm fine." Fine isn't married with children, dear. Fine isn't living alone in that apartment doing God knows what with computers all day. I bit my tongue. My apartment was a high-security condo near Edwards Air Force Base, and my computer work involved designing autonomous flight systems for classified military projects. But to them, I was just Claire, the weird daughter who couldn't hold down a normal job or find a husband. "Leave her be, Patricia." The deep voice came from behind me, and I turned to see Colonel Mason Reeve. My breath caught. What was he doing here? "Mason." My father pumped his hand enthusiastically. "So glad you could make it. This is my daughter Claire. Claire. Colonel Reeve is an old friend from my Legion post." Mason's gray eyes met mine, and I saw the slightest nod, a silent acknowledgement of our secret. He was in civilian clothes, but he still carried himself with military precision. The last time I'd seen him, he was being pulled from the wreckage of an experimental aircraft in the Nevada desert, alive because I'd managed to override the failing systems remotely and guide him to a controlled crash. "Pleasure to meet you, Claire," he said formally, playing along. "Likewise, Colonel." My mother ushered us to the main table, strategically placing me next to Mason and across from Jake. The comparison was intentional. I knew. "Look at your successful brother." Her placement said, "Look at what you could have been." The conversation flowed around me stories of Jake's recent promotion, his deployment stories carefully edited for civilian ears, his plans to marry his girlfriend next spring. Each achievement was punctuated by a glance my way, checking to see if I was properly impressed or appropriately ashamed. "And what about you, Claire?" my aunt asked. "Still doing that?" "What was it?" "Technical support." "Aerospace engineering," I corrected quietly. Jake laughed. "She fixes computers for drone hobbyists, calls it aerospace engineering to sound important." The table chuckled. My father shook his head with that familiar look of fond disappointment. My mother sighed as if my career choice was a personal betrayal. I felt my hands tremble around my wine glass. They had no idea that 6 months ago, I'd spent 72 hours straight debugging code that kept a prototype stealth drone from crashing into a civilian area. No idea that my hobby work had prevented an international incident. No idea that the man sitting beside me had personally recommended me for a Medal of Freedom that I couldn't accept publicly. Interesting, Mason said quietly, his voice cutting through the laughter. I've always found aerospace engineering fascinating. The precision required, the split-second decisions, the weight of responsibility. Not everyone can handle that kind of pressure. Jake waved him off. Come on, Colonel. It's not like she's flying combat missions. She sits at a desk all day. I caught Mason's jaw tightening. He knew exactly what I did, the risks I took, the lives I'd saved. But like me, he was bound by security clearances and official secrets. The party continued around me, a symphony of casual dismissal and polite condescension. I was the ghost at the feast, visible but not really seen, present but not really acknowledged. Just Claire, the family's disappointment, the cautionary tale they told their children about wasted potential. Mason's presence beside me was both a comfort and a torture. He was proof that my work mattered, that I mattered. But that proof was locked behind classifications and red tape, leaving me to smile and nod while my family laughed at achievements they couldn't even imagine. As the evening wore on and the stories grew more elaborate, I wondered how much longer I could maintain this silence. How many more family gatherings would I endure as the punchline to their jokes? The country music grew louder as the night deepened, mixing with the amber glow of the string lights my mother had insisted on hanging everywhere. The dining room felt suffocating, filled with the sound of clinking glasses and cruel laughter that always seemed to find its way to me. Jake stood up, swaying slightly from his fourth beer, raising his glass high. I want to make a toast, he announced, his voice carrying over the Tim McGraw song playing in the background. To family, to Mom and Dad's 40 years, and to my little sister Claire, the family's dreamer. She builds drones, not dreams. The room erupted in laughter. My cousin Tommy slapped the table. That's a good one. Jake. My aunts tittered behind their hands. Even my father chuckled, shaking his head in that way that said, "What are we going to do with her?" Remember when she said she was going to be an astronaut? Jake continued. On a roll now. Then it was a pilot, then an engineer. Now she's... What is it again? Claire, a computer repair technician with delusions of grandeur. Jake, that's enough, I said quietly, but my voice was drowned out by more laughter. Oh, come on, sis. It's all in good fun. We can't all be heroes, right? Someone has to be the cautionary tale. Kids, study hard or you'll end up like Aunt Claire, 32, single, and playing with toy airplanes. My mother didn't intervene. She just smiled that tight smile that meant she agreed but was too polite to say so. My father raised his own glass to Jake's toast, adding his approval to the mockery. The betrayal cut deeper than Jake's words. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to believe in me, defend me, see my worth even when others didn't. Instead, they sat there, complicit in their golden child's performance, their silence as damning as their laughter. You know what the real joke is, Jake continued, emboldened by the attention. She has a security clearance. For what, to make sure nobody steals her toy helicopter designs. He laughed at his own joke. Meanwhile, I'm flying actual combat missions, putting my life on the line for this country. My hands clenched under the table. I remembered the mission 3 years ago with crystal clarity. The experimental aircraft codenamed Project Icarus had suffered catastrophic system failure during a test flight over the Nevada desert. 32 people were on that aircraft, including Colonel Reeve and a team of engineers who were evaluating the new navigation system I'd designed. The pilot was unconscious. The co-pilot was panicking. The aircraft was spinning toward a populated area. I'd been monitoring from the ground station, and in those 7 minutes and 32 seconds, I'd remotely accessed the aircraft's systems, bypassed 14 safety protocols, and manually programmed a new flight path using nothing but mathematical calculations and instinct. I'd saved 32 lives that day, including the man sitting beside me, but I couldn't say a word about it. Some people serve differently, Mason said, his voice low but firm. Jake turned to him with a grin. Sure, Colonel, but they're serving, And then there's whatever Claire does. No offense, sis, but debugging code isn't exactly heroic. No offense taken. I lied, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. We can't all be Captain America. That's the spirit, Jake laughed, missing my sarcasm entirely. See, she knows her place. My place. As if my place wasn't in a classified bunker, working 18-hour days to keep experimental aircraft from falling out of the sky. As if my place wasn't designing systems that would revolutionize aerial warfare. As if my place wasn't being the last line of defense between mechanical failure and catastrophe. Remember when she crashed Dad's car trying to improve the engine? My cousin Sarah chimed in. She was what, 16? Thought she knew better than Ford engineers. More laughter. The story had been retold so many times it had become family legend. Nobody ever mentioned that my modifications had actually worked. The car had run more efficiently. The crash happened because Jake had taken it without permission and driven it into a tree trying to impress a girl. But the story had been revised, and I was the punchline. Or when she got that internship at Boeing and lasted 2 whole months, my aunt added, "What happened there, Claire? Too much real work." I'd left Boeing because the Air Force had recruited me for a classified position I couldn't discuss. But to them, it was just another failure on my long list of disappointments. Mason's hand briefly touched my arm under the table, a silent show of support. He knew the truth. He knew that while Jake was flying predetermined missions in established aircraft, I was pioneering technology that wouldn't be public for another decade. He knew that my toy drones had saved more lives than anyone at this table could imagine. But knowing and saying were two different things, and both of us were bound by oaths that superseded family gatherings and personal vindication. The mockery continued, each family member adding their own jab, their own memory of my failures and shortcomings. And through it all, my parents sat silent, their smiles and nods giving permission for the humiliation to continue. I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood but had never bothered to share my dreams, who knew my name but had never known my worth. The yellow light made their laughing faces look distorted, almost grotesque, like masks of cruelty worn by strangers. If they only knew, I thought, watching Jake bask in the attention. If they only knew who really keeps them safe. I couldn't take it anymore. The laughter followed me as I pushed back my chair and walked out onto the deck. The cool air from Lake Michigan hit my face, a welcome relief from the suffocating warmth inside. The waves lapped against the shore in the darkness, their rhythm steady and indifferent to human cruelty. I gripped the wooden railing, my knuckles white in the moonlight. The party sounds drifted through the glass doors, muffled now, but still there, still celebrating, still laughing at the family disappointment who had excused herself from the table. You don't owe them silence forever. I didn't turn around. I'd heard Mason's footsteps on the deck, felt his presence before he spoke. He moved quietly for a large man, a skill honed by decades of military service. Silence was the only armor that worked, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. They made up their minds about me years ago. The truth wouldn't change anything. He came to stand beside me, his hands resting on the railing. You sure about that? I laughed bitterly. You saw them in there. They've built an entire mythology around my failures. I'm the cautionary tale they tell their kids. Don't be like Aunt Claire. Even if I could tell them the truth, they'd find a way to diminish it. You saved my life. The words hung in the air between us. I closed my eyes, remembering that day 3 years ago. The alarms screaming in the control room, the telemetry showing impossible readings, the aircraft spinning, falling, dying. I did my job, I said. No. His voice was firm. You did the impossible. When that bird went down, when all our systems failed, when the pilot had a stroke and the co-pilot froze, you were 800 miles away, and you still found a way to bring us home. Not home, I corrected. I found a way to crash you somewhere survivable. You overrode military-grade encryption in 90 seconds. You reprogrammed our navigation system using nothing but satellite uplinks and mathematics I still don't understand. You calculated wind speeds, fuel consumption, weight distribution, and trajectory in your head while simultaneously managing 4 different communication channels. He turned to look at me. You know what the investigation board called it, a miracle. They called it a systems anomaly that required further study, I said. In the classified report, they called it a miracle, one that had a name, Claire Donovan. The waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. Inside, someone had turned up the music. I could hear Jake's voice rising above it, probably telling another war story, another tale of his heroism. You know what the hardest part was? I asked. It wasn't the technical challenge. It wasn't the pressure. It was afterward, when I couldn't tell anyone. My parents called that night to tell me about Jake's promotion. I had just saved 32 lives, prevented a potential international incident, and pioneered a new emergency override protocol, and I had to listen to them go on about how proud they were of Jake for getting a commendation for a routine training exercise. You gave me my life, Mason said quietly. My wife got to see me again. My daughters got to keep their father. Maybe it's time someone saw what that costs. I shook my head. The NDA doesn't prevent me from expressing my opinion about someone's character, doesn't stop me from demanding respect for someone who deserves it. They'll never understand, I said, watching the darkness over the water. Even if you told them everything you could legally say, they'd still see me as the screw-up who couldn't make it in their world, because that's easier than admitting they were wrong. Then let them see, he said. Not understand. See. There's a difference. I turned to look at him. His face was carved from shadows and moonlight, the face of a man who'd seen death up close and lived to tell about it, lived because of me. You know what I thought about when we were going down? He asked. Not my training, not my career, not even my family. At first, I thought about how I was going to die in a metal coffin, and nobody would ever know why. The project was so classified, they would have made up a training accident story. My wife would have gotten a folded flag and a lie. He paused, his jaw tightening. Then I heard your voice on the comm. Calm, steady, telling me to disable the autopilot, to trust you. A voice I'd never heard before, belonging to someone I'd never met, asking me to put 32 lives in their hands. And I did, because in that moment, your voice was the only thing that made sense in the chaos. Mason. After the crash, when I was recovering, I pulled your file. Read about your work. Your real work, not the cover story you tell at parties. Do you know what your commanding officer wrote in your evaluation? I shook my head. Officer Donovan possesses the rarest combination of technical brilliance and grace under pressure I have encountered in 30 years of service. Her contributions to aerospace defense, while necessarily classified, represent the future of American air superiority. It is my professional opinion that she has saved more lives through her innovations than most decorated combat veterans. The words hit me like physical blows. I'd never seen that evaluation, never knew it existed. They should know, he said, gesturing toward the house. Yao, maybe not the details, but they should know that their daughter, their sister, is extraordinary. That she's a hero. Heroes get parades, I said. I get NDAs. You get to sleep at night knowing the truth. But that's a cold comfort when your own family treats you like a failure. We stood in silence for a moment, the party continuing behind us, oblivious to our conversation. Inside, Jake was probably showing off his medals again. My parents were probably apologizing for their disappointing daughter. The relatives were probably shaking their heads, wondering where they went wrong with me. I'm tired of being silent, I admitted. I'm tired of being their punchline. Mason looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then maybe it's time to change the narrative. How I can't tell them about the classified work. I can't show them the commendations locked in a vault somewhere. You can't tell them the details, he agreed. But I can tell them about character. About courage. About the kind of person who puts duty above recognition. They might not understand the specifics, but they'll understand respect. And if they don't," he shrugged, "then at least you'll know you tried." I looked back toward the house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the family that had never really seen me. They'll never believe it. To them, I'm just Claire, the failure. Then let them see Claire, the woman who earned a colonel's respect. Let them wonder why. Let them question what they think they know. We returned to the dining room just as Jake was reaching the pinnacle of another story. He stood at the head of the table, his hands gesturing wildly, recreating some aerial maneuver for his captive audience. The medals on his dress uniform caught the light with every movement. And there I was, pulling 6 Gs, the enemy missile lock warning screaming in my ears. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw us. "Oh, look who's back. Did you need some air?" "Claire, I know my war stories can be a bit intense for civilians." I took my seat without responding. Mason settled beside me, his movements deliberate, controlled. The tension in his shoulders was visible only to someone who knew what to look for. "Please, continue your story, Captain," Mason said, his tone perfectly neutral. I always find it interesting to hear different perspectives on aerial combat. Jake preened at the attention from a superior officer. "Well, as I was saying, the missile was locked, and I had maybe 3 seconds to react." "Fascinating," Mason interrupted smoothly. 3 whole seconds. That must have felt like an eternity." "Exactly," Jake agreed, missing the subtle edge in Mason's voice. "In combat, 3 seconds is a lifetime." "Indeed. Though I imagine someone like your sister might have a different perspective on time pressure." Jake laughed. "Claire, the only pressure she faces is whether to use Python or Java for her little programs." A stranger at the table, someone's +1 I didn't recognize, leaned forward with interest. "You served in the military, sir?" he asked Mason. Mason smiled slightly. "Yes, 28 years in the Air Force." "You must have some stories of your own," the man continued. "A few?" Mason's fingers drummed once on the table. "Though I've found the most impressive stories are often the ones that can't be told at dinner parties." "Classified stuff?" Jake asked eagerly. "I've got a pretty high clearance myself." "Top secret." "Do you now?" Mason's eyebrow raised slightly. "How impressive?" My mother, always the hostess, tried to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Well, we're just so proud of Jake's service. It's wonderful to have a hero in the family." "A hero," Mason repeated, tasting the word. "Tell me, Mrs. Donovan, how do you define heroism?" She looked flustered. "Well, someone who serves their country, who puts themselves in danger. Someone visible," my father added. "Someone whose achievements we can see, can celebrate." "Ah," Mason nodded slowly. "So heroism requires an audience." "That's not what he meant," Jake interjected, sensing something shifting in the conversation he couldn't quite identify. "Of course not," Mason agreed pleasantly. "Though it's interesting, isn't it, how we assign value to service based on what we can see, what we're allowed to know. The soldier with the medals gets the recognition, while the engineer who designed the technology keeping that soldier alive remains invisible." "Engineers are important too," Jake said dismissively. "But they're not exactly risking their lives." Mason's laugh was short and sharp. "Aren't they? Tell me, Captain, have you ever had to make a decision where 32 lives hung in the balance, with 90 seconds to act, and no one to consult?" "Well, no. But have you ever had to choose between your own safety and completing a critical mission that nobody would ever know about?" Jake's face reddened. "What's your point, Colonel?" "My point is that heroism takes many forms, and I've served under some of the best pilots I've ever known." He paused, his gaze sweeping the table. "One in particular stands out." "Must have been quite a pilot," the stranger said, genuinely interested. "Extraordinary," Mason confirmed. "The kind of person who could remotely pilot a damaged aircraft from 800 miles away, calculate trajectory algorithms in their head, and save an entire crew from certain death. Jake scoffed. That's impossible. Nobody can remotely pilot military aircraft. The encryption alone. You're right, Mason said calmly. It should be impossible. Which makes it all the more remarkable that it happened. The table had gone quiet. Everyone was watching Mason now, drawn by the conviction in his voice. This pilot, my mother ventured. They must be very celebrated in military circles. You'd think so, Mason replied. But no, their work is too sensitive, too classified. They receive no public recognition, no medals that can be displayed at family gatherings. They sit at tables like this one, listening to others disparage their work, unable to speak about their true contributions. That must be frustrating, the stranger said sympathetically. Frustrating. Mason's voice hardened slightly. Imagine saving lives, preventing disasters, pioneering technology that won't be declassified for decades, and then coming home to be mocked for your toy drones and little programs. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Look, if you're trying to make some point about Claire— Am I? Mason asked innocently. I'm simply sharing my experience. Though it's interesting that you immediately thought of your sister. Why is that? Captain. Because you keep looking at her, Jake accused. Do I? Perhaps it's because I recognize something in her that you don't. The same quality I saw in that pilot who saved my life. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged confused glances. Jake's jaw was clenched, his hands fisted on the table. What are you saying? My father asked slowly. Mason leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I'm saying that strength isn't always visible. Courage doesn't always wear a uniform. And sometimes, the people we dismiss as failures are the ones standing between us and catastrophe. He stood up, straightening his jacket. I think I'll get some air. The atmosphere in here has become rather stifling. As he walked past my chair, he paused, his hand briefly resting on my shoulder. To everyone else, it might have looked like a casual gesture, but I felt the weight of it, the unspoken message. Ready. I looked up at him, then around the table at my family's confused, uncomfortable faces. Jake was glaring at me with suspicion. My mother was wringing her napkin nervously. My father looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. They were so close to the truth, yet still so far from understanding. The setup was complete. The stage was set. All that remained was the revelation. Mason stopped at the doorway and turned back, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. You know what, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. No, I'm not going anywhere. He walked back to the table with measured steps, each footfall deliberate. When he reached his place, he didn't sit. Instead, he stood behind his chair, hands gripping its back, his presence commanding absolute attention. You all think strength is about medals and muscles, he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. You're wrong. Colonel, my father started. I'm not finished. The authority in Mason's tone silenced my father instantly. I've listened to you all evening, listened to you mock, belittle, and dismiss someone without having any idea who she really is or what she's accomplished. He lifted his hand and pointed directly at me. Respect her. The words landed like a thunderclap. Jake's face flushed red, and he burst out laughing a defensive, nervous sound. For what she builds gadgets, she plays with computers. She built the machine that kept 30 soldiers alive, Mason said, his voice rising. Including me. The laughter died in Jake's throat. Every eye in the room turned to me, then back to Mason. What are you talking about? My mother whispered. Mason reached into his jacket and pulled out his military ID, setting it on the table. Colonel Mason Reeve, United States Air Force, retired. 3 years ago. I was the mission commander on a classified test flight. The aircraft suffered catastrophic failure. Total system shutdown at 30,000 feet. Pilot incapacitated. Co-pilot in shock. 32 souls on board, including myself. He paused, letting the words sink in. We should have died. By every metric, every calculation, every expert analysis after the fact. We should have crashed into a populated area outside Las Vegas. The death toll would have been in the hundreds. But you didn't, the stranger said, leaning forward. What happened? Your daughter happened, Mason said, looking directly at my parents. Your sister happened, he added, his gaze shifting to Jake. Claire happened. That's impossible, Jake sputtered. She doesn't even have flight training. She doesn't need it. She's an engineer, not a pilot. From a ground station 800 miles away, she hacked into our dead systems using protocols she invented on the spot. She calculated our descent rate, wind patterns, fuel distribution, and weight ratios in real time. She manually programmed a new flight path using nothing but mathematics and satellite uplinks. Mason's voice grew stronger, filled with emotion I'd never heard from him before. For 7 minutes and 32 seconds, Claire Donovan held 32 lives in her hands. While you were probably having lunch, complaining about your disappointing daughter, she was rewriting the laws of aviation physics to save lives. You're making this up, Jake said desperately. This is some kind of joke. Do I look like I'm joking, Captain? Mason's eyes were steel. Do you think I would fabricate a story about the worst day of my life, the day I should have died, the day I learned what real heroism looks like? He pulled out his phone, swiped to a photo, and held it up. It showed a classified commendation letter, heavily redacted but with my name clearly visible. This is all I'm allowed to show you. Everything else is classified beyond your clearance level. Captain Donovan, yes, even beyond your top secret clearance. My mother's hand was covering her mouth. Claire, is this true? I remained silent, bound by years of training and legal obligations. She can't answer you, Mason said. She's bound by NDAs that would make your head spin. She can't tell you about the lives she's saved. She can't tell you about the technology she's developed. She can't tell you that she's considered one of the most valuable assets in aerospace defense. But she fixes drones, my father said weakly. She designs autonomous flight systems that will revolutionize aerial warfare. The toy drones you mock, they're prototypes for technology that won't be public for another decade. The little programs you laugh at, they're algorithms that have prevented 3 international incidents in the last 18 months. Mason moved around the table, stopping behind my chair. Every time you mocked her work, you were mocking someone who has done more for national security than most people in uniform. Every time you called her a disappointment, you were dismissing a woman who has letters of commendation from generals you've only seen on television. Every time you compared her unfavorably to Jake, no offense. Captain, you were comparing a good soldier to someone extraordinary. Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is bullshit. Claire's not some secret hero. She's just what Mason challenged. Just the woman who saved my life. Just the engineer who solved problems that stumped entire teams of experts. Just your sister who sat here silently while you turned her into a punchline. Why didn't she ever say anything? My aunt asked, her voice small. Because real service doesn't need witnesses, Mason said, echoing words I'd spoken to him years ago. Because duty isn't about recognition. Because some people understand that the work is more important than the credit. He looked down at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before, not just respect, but a fierce protectiveness. But I'm tired of watching her be diminished by people who couldn't do what she does on their best day. I'm tired of pretending that classified means worthless. I'm tired of the silence. The room was absolutely still. The music had been turned off at some point during Mason's speech. Even the house seemed to be holding its breath. So yes, Captain Donovan, Mason said, his voice now quiet but intense. Respect her. Not because I'm ordering you to, but because she's earned it 1,000 times over. Respect her because while you were collecting visible medals, She was collecting invisible scars. Respect her because she's the reason 32 families didn't have to attend funerals 3 years ago. He straightened up, his military bearing perfect. Respect her because she's a hero, even if she can never tell you about it herself. Mason reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a small wooden box. He set it on the table with deliberate care, the soft thud echoing in the silent room. His fingers traced the edges before opening it, revealing a military challenge coin embedded with the Air Force insignia and a classified unit emblem. "This," he said, lifting the coin so everyone could see it, "is from Project Icarus. Only 32 of these exist, one for each person who was on that aircraft." He turned the coin over, revealing an inscription. Though most couldn't read it from where they sat, his voice was clear as he recited, "For exceptional service above and beyond," dated 3 years ago. Then he pulled out something else, a folded American flag, triangle-shaped, the kind given to families at military funerals. But this one had a small brass plate attached to it. "This flag," Mason said, his voice cracking slightly, "was meant for my wife, my daughters. It was already prepared, already waiting. They had written my death certificate. Time of death, 2:15 p.m. Nevada time. Cause training accident. The cover story was ready." My mother let out a small gasp. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "But at 2:14 p.m., Mason continued, "your daughter accomplished the impossible. 1 minute. That's all that separated my family from a folded flag and a lie." He set the flag down gently, then looked directly at Jake. "You want to know what real pressure is? Captain, it's not 3 seconds to evade a missile. It's 90 seconds to hack military encryption while 32 people plummet toward Earth. It's making calculations that MIT professors later called theoretically impossible while knowing that 1 decimal point off means everyone dies." "You're joking," my mother whispered, her face pale. Mason pulled out his phone again, swiping to another photo. This one showed a group of people in military dress uniforms, standing in what was clearly a classified facility. I was in the photo, slightly to the side, trying to remain inconspicuous as always. This was taken at the classified commendation ceremony, the one you never knew about, the one where your daughter received honors she can't display, recognition she can't share, and a standing ovation from people whose names you'd recognize if I could tell you. Jake slumped back in his chair, his face cycling through emotions: disbelief, anger, confusion, and something that might have been shame. "Why are you telling us this now?" my father asked, his voice hoarse. "Because I've held my silence for 3 years, Mason replied. "I've watched Claire protect her family from the burden of knowing. I've watched her choose your peace of mind over her own recognition. But tonight, watching you all laugh at her, mock her dedication, dismiss her as a failure, I couldn't stand it anymore." He reached into his jacket one more time, pulling out a letter. The letterhead was visible. Department of Defense, though most of the content was blacked out. "This is a letter from the Secretary of Defense. I'm not allowed to read most of it to you, but there's one line that isn't classified." He adjusted his glasses and read, "Ms. Donovan's actions represent the highest ideals of American innovation and service." That's from the actual Secretary of Defense," my cousin whispered. "Dated 6 months ago," Mason confirmed. "Regarding an incident I can't discuss. Another save. Another invisible moment of heroism." My aunt had tears in her eyes. "Claire, we didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Mason corrected sharply. "You had a narrative that was easier. The struggling daughter, the family disappointment. It was simpler than asking real questions, than looking deeper, than wondering why someone with Claire's obvious intelligence would be doing simple work." He walked over to where my parents sat, placing both hands on their table. "Your daughter has been carrying state secrets that would break most people. She's been living a double life, accepting your derision rather than compromising national security. She's been protecting you from the weight of knowing that your child regularly holds lives in her hands, My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. We thought you wasted your life, she said to me. No, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since Mason began. I just lived one you never asked about. But why didn't you tell us something, anything? Jake asked, his earlier bravado completely gone. Because real service doesn't need witnesses, I repeated. Because the work matters more than the credit. Because keeping you safe from knowing was more important than defending myself. Mason returned to his place but remained standing. Every time Claire sits at this table, listening to you praise Jake's visible service while mocking her invisible sacrifice, she makes a choice. She chooses family over ego, silence over self-defense, your comfort over her vindication. He picked up the challenge coin again, holding it up to the light. 32 people went home to their families because of Claire. 32 people who will never know her name, never know what she did, never be able to thank her. And she's fine with that. But I'm not fine with watching her own family treat her like she's worthless. Claire, my father said, his voice breaking. Is this all true? Are you really? I met his eyes, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, the man who'd raised me but never really seen me. I can neither confirm nor deny anything Colonel Reeve has said about classified operations. It was a non-answer that was itself an answer, the official response I'd been trained to give. My God, Jake breathed. You're actually a hero. No, I said firmly. I'm an engineer who was in the right place at the right time with the right skills. Heroes are the ones who rush into burning buildings. I just type very fast under pressure. Listen to her, Mason said, shaking his head. Still deflecting, still minimizing, still protecting you from the full weight of what she's done. The challenge coin caught the light as he set it down in front of me. That belongs to you, he said. You earned it, 32 times over. The room was thick with emotion, shame, awe, regret, disbelief. The family that had spent years building a mythology around my failures was watching it crumble in real time. Now you know, Mason said, his voice quiet but firm. Not everything that would be illegal, but enough. Enough to understand that the woman you've been mocking is extraordinary. Enough to know that respect isn't a request, it's long overdue. Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. His face was flushed, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. For a moment, he just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was drowning in air. Why didn't you tell us? He finally managed, his voice cracking like it hadn't since he was 16. Why didn't you fucking tell us? Claire, Jake, my mother admonished through her tears, but her heart wasn't in it. He laughed, but it came out broken, almost hysterical. No, Mom. No. Do you understand what we've done? Do you understand what I've done? He pressed his palms against his eyes. Jesus Christ. I've spent years mocking her, making her the butt of every joke, and she just sat there and took it. Because real service doesn't need witnesses, I repeated quietly. Stop saying that, Jake shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The glasses jumped. Stop being so goddamn noble about it. We treated you like garbage. I treated you like garbage. His voice broke completely on the last word. Captain Jake Donovan, decorated Air Force pilot, the golden child who never showed weakness, was crying. Every family gathering, he continued, his voice thick with tears. Every birthday, every holiday, every fucking dinner. I made sure everyone knew how much better I was than you, how much more successful, how much more important. He laughed again, that same broken sound. Remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago? I spent 20 minutes telling everyone about my first combat mission while you sat there. Silent. You know what you said when I finished? You said, that must have been scary. That's it. No competition. No one-upmanship. Just understanding. I remember, I said softly. You'd already saved 32 people by then. You'd already done something I could never do, something superhuman, and you just let me have my moment. Let me feel special." He wiped his face roughly. "What kind of person does that? The kind who loves her brother," I answered. That broke him completely. Jake collapsed back into his chair, sobbing openly now. My mother reached for him, but he pulled away. "No," he said. "No, I don't deserve comfort. Do you know what I said to my squadron about her? I called her my underachiever sister. I used her as an example of wasted potential. He looked at me, his eyes red and swollen. "I'm so sorry. Claire." "I'm so fucking sorry." My mother was crying too now, her carefully applied makeup running in streams down her face. "We thought you wasted your life," she repeated, as if saying it enough times would somehow make it less true. "We told people. We apologized for you. Made excuses. Said you were still finding yourself." "I know," I said. "Your Aunt Janet," my mother continued, her voice rising. "She said you were probably depressed, that we should get you help, and I agreed with her. I agreed I thought you were broken somehow, that you couldn't succeed in the real world." My father hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He sat frozen, staring at the challenge coin on the table like it was a live grenade. "Say something," my mother begged him. "Robert, please, say something." When he finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. "I failed you," he said simply. "A father is supposed to see his child, really see them, protect them, believe in them, and I let them mock you. I joined in sometimes. His voice cracked. "I was ashamed of you." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. "At my Legion meetings," he continued, "when the other fathers talked about their kids' accomplishments, I would change the subject when it came to you. Or I'd talk about Jake instead, my own daughter. And I was ashamed. Dad. No, let me finish. You were saving lives, doing impossible things, serving your country in ways I can't even understand. And I was ashamed because you didn't fit into my narrow definition of success." He stood up slowly, like an old man, though he was only 63. "What kind of father does that make me?" "The kind who didn't know better," I offered. "That's no excuse," he shouted, showing more emotion than I'd seen from him in years. "I should have known better. I should have looked closer, asked questions, defended you even without knowing the truth. That's what fathers do. They believe in their children even when they can't see the whole picture." My cousin Sarah had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, but now she spoke up, her voice small. "We used to joke about you at Christmas, called you Cousin Claire the career confused. We had a betting pool on what job you'd try next." "I know," I said. "You weren't very subtle about it." "You knew." She looked horrified. "You knew we were making fun of you and you still came. You still brought thoughtful gifts and asked about our lives and celebrated our successes." "Family is family," I said simply. "No," Jake said firmly, standing up again. "No, family doesn't treat family like we treated you. Family supports, family believes, family protects. We failed you on every level." Mason, who had been standing quietly, finally spoke. "Now you know what respect costs," he said. "It costs admission of failure. It costs confronting the stories you've told yourselves. It costs recognizing that the person you dismissed might be extraordinary." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 o'clock, each note falling into the silence like a judgment. "Can you ever forgive us?" my mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked around the table at my broken family, at Jake, who'd built his identity on being better than me, at my parents, who'd measured my worth by visible metrics and found me lacking, at my relatives, who'd made me their cautionary tale. "There's nothing to forgive," I said. "You didn't know." "But we should have," Jake insisted. "We should have trusted who you are, not what we could see. We should have known that you wouldn't waste your potential. We should have believed in you." "Belief without evidence is just faith," I said, "and faith is hard." "You had faith in us," my father pointed out. "You protected us, served us, loved us, even when we gave you no reason to." "Yes," I agreed. "I did." "Why?" Jake asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Why didn't you just tell us to fuck off? Why didn't you defend yourself?" I picked up the challenge coin, feeling its weight in my palm. 32 lives, 32 families who didn't have to grieve, 32 reasons why the silence had been worth it. "Because some things matter more than being right," I said. "Some things matter more than recognition. And sometimes, the hardest service is the one nobody sees." I stood up slowly, the challenge coin still in my hand. The weight of it felt different now, not like a burden, but like vindication finally acknowledged. The amber light from my mother's carefully chosen fixtures cast long shadows across the dining room, across the faces of my family who were seeing me for the first time. "I should go," I said quietly. "Claire, please." My mother started. "It's late," I said, cutting her off gently. "And we all need time to process this." I walked around the table, my footsteps measured and calm. When I reached Mason, he stood at attention, not the casual attention of a retired officer at a party, but the full, formal attention of military respect, the kind reserved for superior officers, the kind reserved for heroes. Then, in a movement that made everyone gasp, Colonel Mason Reeve raised his hand in a perfect salute. "It has been an honor. Ms. Donovan," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. I returned the salute, crisp and precise, the way I'd learned during my classified training. "The honor was mine, Colonel." Jake stood up abruptly. "Claire, wait, please." His voice was raw, stripped of all the bravado that had defined him for so long. "I need to say something." I paused at the doorway, not turning around. "I'm sorry, sis," he said, his voice breaking on the childhood nickname he hadn't used in 15 years. "I'm so fucking sorry, and I know sorry isn't enough. I know it doesn't undo years of cruelty, but I need you to know you're not just a hero to those 32 people. You're my hero. You always have been. I was just too insecure to admit it." I turned then, meeting his eyes. My brother, the golden child, the decorated pilot, looked smaller somehow, more human. "Don't be sorry," I said. "Just never laugh at what you don't understand." "Never again," he promised. "Never fucking again." My father approached me slowly, as if afraid I might disappear. When he reached me, he did something he hadn't done since I was 12 years old. He pulled me into a hug. Not the perfunctory, one-armed hugs of recent years, but a real embrace, the kind that said everything words couldn't. "I'm proud of you," he whispered against my hair. "I've always been proud of you. I was just too blind to know why." When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Will you come back for dinner next week? Just family, no party, no relatives. Just us." "Maybe," I said. "We'll see." My mother joined us at the doorway, mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. "Claire, darling, I know, Mom," I said. "I know." "No, you don't," she said firmly. "You don't know how much I love you, how much I've always loved you, even when I was too foolish to show it properly. You don't know how proud I am, how proud I've always been, even when I didn't understand what I was proud of." She cupped my face in her hands, the way she used to when I was small. "You saved 32 people, but more than that, you saved us from ourselves. You showed us what real strength looks like, what real service means." I pulled away gently. "I need to go." As I walked toward the door, the entire room stood up. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, everyone who had laughed at me, mocked me, dismissed me. They all stood in silence, Some were crying. Others just stared, as if seeing me for the first time. Mason followed me out, closing the door behind us. The night air was cool against my flushed skin. Lake Michigan stretched out before us, dark and endless under the star-filled sky. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," he replied. "I should have done that 3 years ago." No, the timing was perfect. They needed to see me fail in their eyes before they could see me succeed in reality. He smiled slightly. "You know what the investigation board really called you, not in the official report, but in the closed sessions." I shook my head. "The ghost, because you saved us all without ever being in the room, without ever being seen, without ever needing credit." "Ghosts don't need applause," I said. "No," he agreed, "but sometimes they deserve it anyway." I walked to my car, a simple Honda Civic that my family had mocked as another sign of my lack of ambition. Mason saluted once more before I got in. As I drove away, I saw them in my rearview mirror, my family, standing on the porch, watching me leave. Jake had his arm around my mother. My father stood apart, his hand raised in a wave that might have been a salute. For 20 years, I'd been their disappointment, their cautionary tale, their family failure. Tonight, in 1 hour, that narrative had shattered, but I knew the truth I hadn't changed. I was the same person who'd walked into that party, the same engineer, the same daughter, the same sister. The only thing that had changed was their ability to see me. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "I love you, sis. Always have. Just forgot how to show it." I smiled, set the phone aside, and drove into the night. Tomorrow, I'd go back to my classified work, my invisible service, my quiet heroism. But tonight, for the first time in my life, my family knew who I really was. The ghost had finally been seen, and sometimes that's all the revenge you need. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow story lovers around the world. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your perspective matters, and I read every comment. Until next time, remember, not all heroes wear capes, and the greatest revenge is simply being seen for who you truly are.